Now these sacrifices we are not willing to make. As parents, we rather use our parental authority on making our children do what they have to do, but we don't want to make the sacrifice along with them. And that is what nonviolent parenting is about. Being able to build that relationship with our children so that they can respect and understand us. I was flying somewhere last week from Rochester, New York, and Rochester schools and colleges had a spring break last week, and so the aircraft was full of parents and their children going on a holiday. And behind me was a family with 2 teenage kids, and they were going on a holiday, and the father was loudly proclaiming for half the aircraft to listen to. I can't understand, why do we have to go to holidays with these kids tagging along with us? When are we ever going to have a holiday without these kids? And I was feeling aghast listening to this. He was trying to make it a joke there, but I couldn't understand the joke. I was trying to figure out, if I was his child sitting there and listening to my father publicly saying this, what am I going to feel for him? And we have to ask ourselves, what is this in us? And I've heard this time and again from people who we are waiting for these kids to grow up and get out and leave us alone. And the kids, on the other hand, have the same corresponding response. We are waiting till we are of age to get out and be independent of our parents. Now, if we cannot respect our parents or our children, how can there be any respect for anybody else? And what kind of family ties can we have if this does not exist among us? The last story that I want to share with you is a story that grandfather used to be very fond of telling us, of an ancient Indian king who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. And everybody came there and did their very best, but nobody could satisfy him. And then one day there was an intellectual from another town who came on a visit, and he stopped to pay homage to the king, and the king asked him the question, and he said, the only person who can give you a satisfactory answer is an old sage who lives outside your kingdom. He is so old that he cannot come to you. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next day the king went to this sage and asked him the question, and the sage quietly went to the kitchen, came back with a grain of wheat and placed it on the palm of the king and said, here is your answer. And of course the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace. And he wasn't about to show his ignorance there. And so he quietly clutched that grain of wheat and went back to the palace and found a little gold box and placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would open the box and look for an answer, and he couldn't find any answers. Then a week later this intellectual came back on a return visit, and the king asked him to explain. And that's when the intellectual said, it's very simple. He said, as long as you keep this grain of wheat in this box, nothing is going to happen. It will eventually rot and perish, and that will be the end of the story. But if you had allowed this grain of wheat to interact with all the elements, if you had planted this outside in the soil, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat. And that is the meaning of peace. That if you have found peace and you keep it locked up in your heart, it will perish with you. But if you let it interact with all the elements, you can spread peace and transform this world. So I have come here tonight with that grain of wheat which was given to me by my grandfather, to give you that grain of wheat, and I hope that you won't let it perish, but let us all let it interact with all the elements so that all of us together can transform this world and make it a more peaceful place for all of us to live in. Thank you.